think the stress is making me lose my mind.
The lunchbox shouldn't have been in my work bag. That's the thought that kept hammering through my skull as I sat in the hospital waiting room, watching my 13-year-old daughter Amelia get her blood drawn for the third time in 2 hours. The pink unicorn lunchbox with its cheerful stickers and cartoon characters now felt like a ticking bomb in my hands. My name is Jake Morrison, and I manage logistics for a medical supply company on the outskirts of Cleveland. It's honest work, pays the bills, keeps food on the table. Nothing glamorous, but it's mine. At 42, I've learned to appreciate the simple things in life, or at least I thought I had until this morning turned my world upside down. Dad, why do I have to stay here? Amelia's voice carried that particular whine that only teenage girls can master. I feel fine now. Because the doctor wants to make sure you're okay, sweetheart. I tried to keep my voice steady, but inside, I was falling apart. The memory of Samir's face when he saw that fruit kept replaying in my mind like a broken record. Samir Patel used to be a doctor back in Mumbai before he moved here and ended up working in our warehouse. Overqualified doesn't begin to describe him, but immigration is a witch, and sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. We'd become friends over the past 2 years, bonding over terrible coffee in the break room and shared complaints about management. This morning had started like any other Tuesday. I'd grabbed my work bag from the kitchen counter, kissed Marta goodbye, though she barely looked up from her phone, and headed out the door. It wasn't until I was sitting in the break room that I realized I'd grabbed Amelia's lunchbox by mistake instead of my usual thermos and sandwich bag. "Hey, Samir, check this out," I'd said, opening the pink unicorn box. "My wife's been packing some fancy stuff for Amelia lately. Look at this fruit." The color drained from Samir's face so fast I thought he might faint. The small, reddish fruit with its distinctive spotted skin suddenly seemed sinister in the fluorescent break room lighting. "Jake, where did this come from?" His voice was tight, urgent. "Marta bought it somewhere. Why? What's wrong?" "This is Rambai fruit. It's only grown in very specific regions of Malaysia and Thailand. Jake, this fruit can cause severe allergic reactions in children, especially those with certain genetic markers. You need to call your daughter's school right now and make sure she hasn't eaten any." The next 30 minutes were a blur of frantic phone calls, racing across town, and trying to explain to the school nurse why I was having a panic attack over fruit. Thankfully, Amelia hadn't eaten lunch yet, but the nurse insisted we go to the hospital as a precaution. Now, sitting in the sterile waiting room, I couldn't stop thinking about that fruit. Marta had been on what she called a girls' trip 3 weeks ago. A long weekend in Miami with her best friend Natasha, or so she'd told me. Beach time, spa treatments, overpriced cocktails, the usual stuff. She'd come back relaxed and distant, which I'd chalked up to post-vacation blues. But Rambai fruit doesn't grow in Miami. "Mr. Morrison?" Dr. Sarah Chen approached with a clipboard and a reassuring smile. "Good news. Amelia's blood work looks normal. No signs of allergic reaction or toxicity. She's free to go home." Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by a growing unease. If the fruit wasn't dangerous to Amelia specifically, that was good, but it still didn't explain how it ended up in our house, or why my wife had lied about where she'd been. The drive home was quiet. Amelia dozed in the passenger seat, exhausted from the morning's drama. I kept glancing at the lunchbox in the back seat, that innocent pink unicorn now seeming to mock me. The fruit was still there, wrapped in plastic, evidence of something I wasn't sure I wanted to investigate. Our house sat in a development that had been built with grand ambitions 20 years ago, but now showed its age in cracked driveways and fading siding. Marta's BMW was in the driveway, which surprised me. She usually worked late on Tuesdays, staying at the advertising agency, where she'd been climbing the corporate ladder for the past 5 years. "Why don't you go rest in your room?" I told Amelia as we walked through the front door. I'll bring you some soup in a bit. Marta was in the kitchen, standing at the island with her laptop open and papers spread around her. She looked up when we entered, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt? Fear? It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "How did it go at the hospital?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "She's fine." No allergic reaction. I set the lunchbox on the counter between us. "But I have some questions about this fruit." Marta's eyes darted to the lunchbox, then back to my face. "What about it? Where did you buy it?" "I don't remember. Some specialty store, I think." "Why?" "This fruit only grows in Southeast Asia, specifically Malaysia and Thailand, not exactly common in Cleveland grocery stores." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Marta closed her laptop with a soft click. "I might have picked it up at that international market on the west side. They have all kinds of exotic things." It was a reasonable explanation, almost believable. But I knew my wife, and I knew when she was lying. After 15 years of marriage, you learn to read the subtle signs. The way she touched her neck when she was nervous, how her voice got just a little too controlled when she wasn't telling the truth. "The Miami trip went well?" I asked, changing tactics. "Yes, it was nice. Relaxing." She started gathering her papers, not meeting my eyes. "I should get back to the office. We have a big presentation tomorrow." She kissed my cheek as she passed, a quick, perfunctory gesture, and then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of her perfume and a growing pit in my stomach. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at that damned lunchbox. The rational part of my brain told me I was overreacting, that there was probably a perfectly innocent explanation for everything. But the other part, the part that had learned to trust my instincts during my brief amateur boxing career in my 20s, was screaming that something was very wrong. I picked up my phone and scrolled through Marta's social media posts from her trip. Plenty of pictures of beaches, cocktails, and spa treatments, all very Miami-like. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd. In one photo, tagged at a beachside restaurant, I could see part of a menu in the background. The text was partially obscured, but what I could make out didn't look like English or Spanish. My hands were shaking as I screenshotted the image and zoomed in. The characters were definitely not Latin alphabet. They looked Southeast Asian. The sound of Amelia's footsteps on the stairs snapped me back to reality. I quickly put my phone away and forced a smile as she appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Dad, I'm hungry." "Can I have that soup now?" "Of course, sweetheart." Coming right up. As I heated up a can of chicken noodle soup, my mind raced. If Marta had lied about where she'd been, who had she been with? Natasha was her usual travel companion, but they'd been friends for years. Why would they lie about their destination, unless Natasha wasn't the only person on the trip? Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in bed next to Marta, listening to her steady breathing and wondering who the woman beside me really was. Every few minutes, I'd catch myself analyzing her behavior from the past few weeks, looking for clues I might have missed. She'd been working later than usual. More weekend trips to the office. New clothes that she claimed were necessary for client meetings. A general distance that I'd attributed to stress from work, but now seemed more deliberate. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to my home office. I'd converted the spare bedroom into a workspace where I handled our finances and stored important documents. If Marta was hiding something, maybe I could find traces of it in our credit card statements. The March statement showed the usual charges: groceries, gas, utilities. But there, buried among the routine expenses, was a charge I didn't recognize. Pacific Rim Travel Services, $3,247, dated 3 days before her supposed Miami trip. Pacific Rim Travel Services. That didn't sound like a Miami vacation. I opened my laptop and did a quick search. Pacific Rim Travel specialized in Southeast Asian destinations. Their website featured beautiful photos of Thai beaches, Malaysian rainforests, and Vietnamese cities. Definitely not Miami. My heart was pounding as I dug deeper into our financial records. There were other charges I'd missed: international transaction fees, a charge from something called Langkawi Resort Group, and several small charges with foreign currency conversions. Langkawi, I Googled it. A tropical island in Malaysia, known for its beaches, resorts, and apparently its Rambai fruit trees. The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made me sick. Marta hadn't gone to Miami with Natasha. She'd gone to Malaysia with someone else. Someone she was willing to lie to her husband about. Someone worth spending over $3,000 to see. But who? I spent the rest of the night making lists, trying to figure out who in Marta's life might warrant such an elaborate deception. Her co-workers were mostly women, and the few men seemed happily married. Her family was scattered across the country, and none of them had the money for international travel. When morning came, I was no closer to answers, but I was more determined than ever to find them. I made coffee and breakfast, playing the role of the oblivious husband while Marta got ready for work. "I might be late tonight," she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "The Henderson account is being difficult." "No problem. I'll pick up Amelia from school and help her with homework." She kissed my cheek again, that same perfunctory gesture, and left. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner before I called in sick to work. I'd never hired a private investigator before, but I figured it couldn't be that complicated. A quick online search gave me several options in the Cleveland area. I chose Mitchell & Associates because their website looked professional, and they offered a free consultation. David Mitchell was a former police detective in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything. His office was in a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and industrial lighting that probably looked trendy to some people but just seemed cold to me. "So, Mr. Morrison, what can I do for you?" I told him everything: the fruit, the credit card charges, the lies about Miami. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "This is pretty straightforward," he said when I finished. "Sounds like your wife is having an affair and she took a trip with her lover. The question is whether you want to know for sure, and if so, what you plan to do with the information. I need to know. I can't live with the uncertainty." "Fair enough. My rate is $75 an hour plus expenses. I'll need a retainer of $1,500 to get started. I can have some preliminary information for you within a week." I wrote the check, feeling like I was crossing a line I could never uncross. But I was already too far down the rabbit hole to turn back now. Mitchell walked me through the process: surveillance, background checks, financial investigation. It all sounded very professional and clinical, which somehow made it worse. My marriage was falling apart, and I was turning it into a business transaction. "One more thing," Mitchell said as I was leaving. "Be prepared for what you might find." In my experience, the truth is usually worse than what people imagine. I spent the rest of the day in a coffee shop downtown, trying to work up the courage to go home and pretend everything was normal. My phone buzzed with a text from Marta. "Working late again. Don't wait up." On impulse, I decided to drive by her office. The advertising agency occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in the business district. I parked across the street and looked up at the lit windows, trying to spot Marta's silhouette. Her BMW wasn't in the parking garage. I sat there for 2 hours, watching the building. Employees came and went, but I never saw Marta. At 9 p.m., the lights in her department went dark. Either she was working in a different part of the building, or she wasn't there at all. When I got home, Amelia was in her room doing homework. I helped her with algebra, grateful for the distraction of normal parental duties. We ordered pizza and watched a movie, and for a few hours, I could almost pretend that my world wasn't falling apart. Marta came home at 11:30 looking tired and stressed. She went straight upstairs without saying much beyond a quick hello. I followed her up 20 minutes later and found her already in bed, facing away from me. "How was the Henderson presentation?" I asked. "Fine." We got the account. Another lie. I'd called the agency's main number that afternoon and asked to be transferred to someone working on the Henderson account. The receptionist had told me there was no Henderson account. I lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling and listening to Marta's breathing. The woman I'd married, the mother of my child, had become a stranger. Worse than a stranger, she'd become an enemy who was actively deceiving me. The next morning brought a text from Mitchell. "Can you meet this afternoon? I have some preliminary findings." I met him at a diner near his office. He slid a manila folder across the table, his expression grim. "I ran a background check on the travel agency and cross-referenced it with your wife's credit card activity. She definitely went to Malaysia, specifically to Langkawi Island. But here's the interesting part. She wasn't alone, and it wasn't with another woman." My hands were shaking as I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of hotel reservations, flight records, and several photographs that made my blood run cold. The photos showed Marta at a beach resort, but she wasn't with Natasha. She was with a man I recognized immediately, Greg Hartwell, her uncle by marriage, her sister's husband's brother, a successful real estate developer who lived in the wealthy suburb of Shaker Heights. In the photos, they weren't acting like relatives. "There's more," Mitchell said. "I did some digging into Mr. Hartwell's background. He's been to Southeast Asia multiple times in the past year, always staying at expensive resorts. And get this, he's been having financial problems. His real estate company is leveraged to the hilt, and he's been looking for investors." I stared at the photos, feeling sick. Greg was in his mid-40s, tall and handsome in that artificial way that comes from expensive grooming and regular gym memberships. He'd always been charming at family gatherings, the kind of guy who told jokes and bought rounds of drinks and made everyone feel like his best friend. He was also married to Linda, Marta's sister, and they had 2 kids. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Based on the financial records, at least 6 months, maybe longer. They've been careful, but not careful enough." I closed the folder, unable to look at the photos anymore. "What's my next step?" "That depends on what you want to accomplish. Do you want to save your marriage, end it, get revenge?" Each path requires a different approach. I didn't answer immediately. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. The Marta I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago seemed like a different person entirely. But there was still Amelia to consider, and our shared history, and the life we'd built together. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "Take your time. But don't take too long. In my experience, these situations have a way of escalating quickly once they're exposed." I drove home in a daze, Mitchell's words echoing in my head. The photos were burning a hole in the folder on my passenger seat, evidence of a betrayal that went deeper than I'd imagined. It wasn't just that Marta was having an affair. She was having an affair with a family member, someone who sat at our dinner table during holidays and called me buddy and acted like my friend. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. Everything looked the same. The furniture we'd picked out together, the family photos on the mantel, Amelia's school artwork on the refrigerator. But it all felt like a lie now. A carefully constructed facade hiding something rotten underneath. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the folder, when Amelia came home from school. "Dad, are you okay? You look weird." I forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetheart." "How was school?" "Boring. Can I go to Sarah's house tonight? We have a history project due tomorrow." "Sure, I'll drive you over after dinner. Normal parental conversations, normal teenage requests, but underneath it all the knowledge that our family was about to explode into a million pieces." That evening, after I'd dropped Amelia at her friend's house, I sat in my car outside Greg Hartwell's mansion in Shaker Heights. It was a massive colonial with a circular driveway and perfectly manicured landscaping, the kind of house that screamed success and stability. Greg's Porsche was in the driveway next to Linda's Mercedes. Through the front windows, I could see them moving around inside, probably having dinner or watching TV. A normal family evening, just like I thought I'd been having for the past 15 years. My phone buzzed with a text from Marta. Working late again. Might not be home until after midnight. I looked at the timestamp, 7:30 p.m. Then I looked at the house, where Greg was clearly at home with his wife and kids. So where was Marta, and who was she really with? The answer came sooner than I expected. As I sat in my car watching Greg's house, my phone rang. It was Natasha, Marta's supposed best friend and travel companion. Jake? Is Marta with you? She was supposed to meet me for drinks an hour ago, but she never showed up. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She told me she was working late. Working late? On a Friday? That's weird. She specifically asked me to meet her at that new wine bar downtown, said she had something important to tell me. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Marta wasn't with Greg tonight, but she also wasn't at work. She was somewhere else entirely, probably planning her next move, and Natasha, who I'd assumed was complicit in the affair, seemed genuinely confused. Jake, is everything okay? You sound strange. I'm fine. If you hear from Marta, tell her to call me. I hung up and drove home, my mind racing. If Natasha wasn't involved in the affair, then who was helping Marta cover her tracks? Someone had to know about the Malaysia trip, the lies about work, the elaborate deception she'd been maintaining. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to wait for Marta to come home and confront her with the evidence. Another part wanted to drive straight to Greg's house and expose the whole thing to Linda. Instead, I went inside and poured myself a large whiskey. Then another. By the time Marta's headlights swept across the living room windows at 12:30 a.m., I was drunk and angry and ready for a fight. She came through the front door quietly, probably hoping I'd be asleep. When she saw me sitting in the dark living room, she jumped. Jesus, Jake, you scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark? I turned on the lamp beside my chair. The manila folder was on the coffee table in front of me, closed but visible. We need to talk. Something in my voice must have warned her because her entire demeanor changed. The casual, tired act disappeared, replaced by wariness. It's late, Jake. Can't this wait until tomorrow? No, it can't. I picked up the folder and held it out to her. Open it. She stared at the folder like it was a snake. What is it? Open it and find out. Her hands were shaking as she took the folder and opened it. I watched her face as she saw the photos. The shock, the fear, and finally resignation. Jake, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you lied about going to Miami? Can you explain why you've been screwing your brother-in-law? Can you explain why you've been lying to me for months? She sank onto the couch, the folder falling from her hands and scattering photos across the coffee table. Images of her and Greg on the beach, holding hands, kissing, looking like lovers on a romantic getaway. It's not what you think, she said weakly. Really? Because it looks like my wife is having an affair with a married man who happens to be related to us. What exactly am I supposed to think? The silence stretched between us. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of traffic on the highway, the normal sounds of a world that was continuing to function while mine fell apart. How long? I asked. Jake. How long, Marta? 8 months. Her voice was barely a whisper. 8 months. While I was working overtime to save money for Amelia's college fund, while I was planning our anniversary dinner, while I was living my normal, boring, faithful life, my wife was planning secret trips to Malaysia with another man. Does Linda know? No. And she can't find out, Jake. It would destroy her family. The audacity of that statement hit me like a physical blow. What about our family? What about Amelia? That's different. How is it different? I was on my feet now, pacing around the living room like a caged animal. You've been lying to me for 8 months. You've been lying to our daughter. You've been sneaking around with a married man who sits at our dinner table during holidays. How is any of that different? Marta started crying, but they felt like calculated tears. The kind she used to get out of speeding tickets or to win arguments with customer service representatives. I never meant for it to happen. It just did. Greg and I have always gotten along, and after Linda's surgery last year, he was so stressed and needed someone to talk to. So you decided to talk to him with your clothes off in Malaysia? Don't be crude, Jake. Crude? You want to talk about crude? Let's talk about the fact that you brought fruit back from your romantic getaway and nearly poisoned our daughter with it. Let's talk about crude. That hit home. Her face went white, and for the first time, the tears looked real. I didn't know about the allergy risk. I would never. You would never what? Risk our daughter's health? Because that's exactly what you did. Also, you could have a souvenir from your affair. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that made me feel decades older. What happens now? Marta asked. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Jake, please. We can work through this. I'll end it with Greg. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. I looked at her sitting on our couch, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal, and tried to find some trace of the woman I'd married. But all I saw was a stranger who had been systematically lying to me for months. You can sleep in the guest room tonight, I said. Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to tell Amelia. Jake, go to bed, Marta. We're done talking for tonight. She gathered up the photos with shaking hands and left the room. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of the guest room door closing. I sat alone in the living room until dawn, drinking whiskey and trying to figure out how my life had gone so completely off the rails. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to just roll over and let Marta and Greg destroy 2 families without consequences. They wanted to play games? Fine. I could play games too. But first, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. Mitchell had given me the basic facts, but I suspected there was more to the story. Affairs don't happen in a vacuum, and elaborate international trips don't get planned overnight. I called Mitchell's office and left a voicemail asking for a more detailed investigation. I wanted to know everything: how the affair started, how long it had been going on, whether there were other people involved, and most importantly, what Greg and Marta's long-term plans were. Because looking at those photos, seeing the way they looked at each other, I didn't think this was just a casual fling. This looked like love, or at least a very convincing imitation of it. And if they were in love, they probably had plans for the future. Plans that likely involved divorcing their respective spouses and starting a new life together. Well, I had news for them. I wasn't going to make it that easy. The next week passed in a blur of awkward family dinners and stilted conversations. Marta and I maintained a facade of normalcy for Amelia's sake, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. We slept in separate rooms and barely spoke except when necessary. Marta claimed she'd ended things with Greg, but I didn't believe her. She was still working late, still making mysterious phone calls, still acting like a woman with secrets. Mitchell called on Thursday with an update. I've got more information, but you're not going to like it, he said. Can you meet me this afternoon? We met at the same diner as before. This time, Mitchell had a much thicker folder. I've been digging deeper into both their backgrounds, he said, sliding the folder across the table. The affair has been going on longer than 8 months. More like a year and a half. And it's not just physical. They've been planning a future together. I opened the folder to find bank statements, email printouts, and more photographs. The emails were the worst part. Intimate conversations about leaving their spouses, starting over together, and building a new life. Greg's been moving money around, Mitchell continued, liquidating assets, transferring funds to offshore accounts. He's preparing for a divorce, but he's also preparing to hide as much money as possible from Linda. What about Marta? She's been more careful, but there are signs. She opened a new bank account 3 months ago that you're not on. She's been depositing her bonuses there instead of in your joint account. I felt sick. It wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated dismantling of 2 marriages. They weren't just betraying their spouses. They were actively working to screw us over financially. There's something else, Mitchell said. I think they're planning to make their move soon. Greg's been looking at properties in Costa Rica, places where extradition is difficult and American dollars go a long way. You think they're planning to flee the country? It's possible, or they might just be planning a very expensive divorce lawyer. Either way, they're not planning to stick around and face the consequences of what they've done. I closed the folder, my hands shaking with rage. It was one thing to have an affair. It was another thing entirely to systematically plan the destruction of 2 families while stealing as much money as possible in the process. What are my options? I asked. Legally? You can file for divorce and try to recover as much of your assets as possible. But if they've been planning this for as long as I think they have, they're probably several steps ahead of you. What about exposing them? Telling Linda what's going on? That's risky. If you tip your hand too early, they might accelerate their timeline. You could end up with nothing. I thought about Linda, Greg's wife and Marta's sister. She was a sweet woman who'd been battling breast cancer for the past 2 years. She'd just finished her final round of chemotherapy and was starting to get her strength back. The idea of her husband planning to abandon her while she was fighting for her life made me physically ill. I need more time to think, I said. Don't take too long. In my experience, these situations have a way of exploding when you least expect it. That evening, I sat in my home office staring at the evidence Mitchell had gathered. The emails were particularly damning, not just because of their intimate content, but because of the cold calculation behind them. In one exchange, Greg had written, "Linda's insurance will cover most of her medical bills, so I don't need to worry about that. And with the prenup, she won't be entitled to much in a divorce." Marta's response, "Jake's been talking about early retirement, which is perfect. He'll be so focused on his pension and 401k that he won't notice the other accounts until it's too late. They were talking about us like we were obstacles to be managed, not human beings whose lives they were destroying." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at Starbucks on Cedar Road in 20 minutes. Linda. My blood ran cold. Had Linda found out about the affair? Was she going to confront me? I drove to the Starbucks in a state of near panic. Linda was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a grim expression. She looked thinner than the last time I'd seen her, her hair just starting to grow back from the chemo, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "Sit down, Jake." I slid into the booth across from her, trying to read her expression. She looked angry, but not at me. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Known what?" "Don't play dumb." "About Greg and Marta. How long have you known?" I stared at her, unsure how to respond. "How did you find out?" "Greg's been sloppy. He left his laptop open last week and I saw some emails. Then I started paying attention to his behavior, his schedule, his credit card statements." She took a sip of her coffee, her hands remarkably steady. "So, I'll ask again. How long have you known?" "About a week. I hired a private investigator." "Good. What did you find out?" I told her everything. The fruit, the Malaysia trip, the financial planning, the offshore accounts. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "Those fools," she said when I finished. "Those calculating, selfish fools. Linda, I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but I wasn't sure how." "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "But we're going to make sure they pay for what they've done." "What do you mean?" "I mean we're going to beat them at their own game. They think they're so smart, planning their little escape to Costa Rica while leaving us with nothing. But they made one mistake." "What's that?" "They underestimated us." Linda smiled, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. "Greg thinks I'm just a weak cancer patient who'll roll over and let him walk away with everything. And Marta thinks you're just a boring logistics manager who won't fight back." "Aren't I?" "Maybe you were. But that was before they tried to destroy your family. The question is, are you ready to fight back?" I looked at Linda. Really looked at her. Despite everything she'd been through with the cancer, despite the betrayal she'd just discovered, she looked strong and determined, and absolutely furious. "What did you have in mind?" "Revenge, Jake. Cold, calculated, devastating revenge. They want to play games? Let's show them how the game is really played." Linda and I spent the next 2 hours planning what she called Operation Karma. Despite her recent health struggles, her mind was sharp and her appetite for revenge was impressive. "The key is timing," she explained, pulling out a notebook and sketching out a timeline. "They're planning to make their move soon, probably within the next month. We need to be ready to strike first." "What exactly are we going to do?" "We're going to expose them publicly, humiliate them professionally, and make sure they don't see a penny of the money they think they're going to steal." Linda had done her homework. As Greg's wife, she had access to all his financial records, business documents, and personal communications. What she'd discovered was even worse than what Mitchell had found. "Greg's been embezzling money from his real estate company," she said, showing me bank statements and transfer records. "He's been using client funds to finance his lifestyle and his affair with your wife. If this gets out, he won't just lose his business. He'll go to prison." "Are you sure about this?" "Positive. I used to be an accountant before I married Greg and became a stay-at-home mom. I know how to read financial statements." Her smile was cold. "He's been very, very bad." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would gather as much evidence as possible, then expose Greg and Marta simultaneously in the most public and humiliating way possible. "There's a big charity gala next Friday," Linda explained. "The Children's Hospital fundraiser at the Ritz-Carlton. Greg and I are supposed to attend together. He's one of the major sponsors. All of Cleveland's elite will be there, including most of Marta's clients and colleagues." "You want to expose them at a charity event?" "I want to destroy them at a charity event, in front of everyone who matters in their professional and social circles." It was ruthless, but given what they'd put us through, it felt appropriate. Over the next week, Linda and I worked together like a well-oiled machine. She copied Greg's files and financial records while I worked with Mitchell to document every aspect of the affair. We gathered emails, photos, bank statements, travel records, and business documents. The evidence was overwhelming. Not only had Greg and Marta been having an affair, but Greg had been stealing money to finance it. The Malaysia trip alone had cost over $15,000, all of it paid for with funds embezzled from his clients. "This is enough to put him away for 10 years, Mitchell said when I showed him Linda's evidence. "Are you sure you want to go the public humiliation route instead of just turning him into the police?" "Prison would be too easy," I said. "I want him to lose everything. His reputation, his business, his social standing. I want everyone to know what kind of man he really is." The charity gala was held in the Ritz-Carlton's grand ballroom. Linda and I arrived separately. She with Greg, playing the role of the devoted wife, and me as a last-minute attendee who'd purchased a ticket that afternoon. Marta was there too, stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She was working the room, schmoozing with clients and potential customers. She looked confident and successful and completely unaware that her world was about to come crashing down. Greg was in his element, playing the role of the successful businessman and generous philanthropist. He gave a speech about the importance of supporting children's health care, his voice full of fake sincerity that made me want to punch him. Linda and I waited until after dinner, when the crowd was relaxed and the wine had been flowing freely. Then, she gave me the signal. I walked to the front of the room and asked the event coordinator if I could make a brief announcement. She looked confused but handed me the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, but I have something important to share with you." The room quieted, hundreds of faces turning toward me. I could see Marta near the back, her expression confused and slightly alarmed. "My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm here tonight to tell you about a man who's been stealing from children's charities to finance his affair with my wife." The silence was deafening. Greg had gone white as a sheet, and Marta looked like she was about to faint. Greg Hartwell, one of tonight's major sponsors, has been embezzling money from his clients and using it to take romantic trips with his sister-in-law. While his wife was fighting cancer, he was planning his escape to Costa Rica with his mistress. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. People were pulling out their phones, taking pictures and videos. Greg started to stand up, probably to deny everything, but Linda beat him to it. "It's all true," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I have the bank statements, the emails, the travel records. Everything." She walked to the front of the room and took the microphone from me. Despite everything she'd been through, she looked strong and dignified and absolutely fearless. "Greg Hartwell is a thief and a liar. He stole money from his clients to finance an affair with Marta Morrison while I was undergoing chemotherapy. He's been planning to abandon me and steal everything I'm legally entitled to in a divorce." The room was in chaos now. People were shouting questions, security guards were moving toward us, and Greg was trying to push his way toward the exit. But Linda wasn't finished. "The evidence has already been turned over to the police and the state attorney general's office. Greg Hartwell will be arrested for embezzlement, and his real estate license will be revoked. As for Marta Morrison," she looked directly at my wife, "I hope your clients at the advertising agency know what kind of person they're doing business with." Security finally reached us, but the damage was done. The entire event had been live-streamed on social media, and videos of our announcement were already going viral. Greg and Marta's reputations were destroyed, their professional lives were over, and their plans for a romantic escape to Costa Rica were in ruins. As security escorted us out of the ballroom, I caught sight of Marta's face. She looked devastated, humiliated, and completely broken. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The aftermath was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, Greg's real estate company was under investigation by the state attorney general's office. His business license was suspended pending a full audit of his financial records. 3 of his major clients had already filed lawsuits, and the local news was running the story as their lead item. Marta's situation was almost as bad. The video of our announcement at the charity gala had been viewed over 100,000 times on social media. Her advertising agency, which prided itself on its squeaky clean reputation, was in full damage control mode. By Tuesday, she'd been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. I felt no sympathy for either of them. Linda and I met for coffee that Wednesday to discuss the legal proceedings. She looked better than she had in months. The stress of keeping Greg's secrets had been weighing on her more than she'd realized. "The FBI is getting involved," she told me. "Apparently Greg's embezzlement scheme was larger than we thought. He's been stealing from clients for over 2 years, not just to finance the affair, but to cover up bad investments and business losses. How much money are we talking about? Over $500,000. He's going to prison, Jake, for a long time. I should have felt satisfied, but mostly I just felt empty." The man who'd been sitting at my dinner table playing with my daughter, pretending to be my friend, was a criminal who'd been systematically destroying lives for years. "What about Marta?" Linda asked. "She's been staying at her mother's house since the gala. She wants to talk, to try to work things out, but I'm done. I've filed for divorce." "Good. You deserve better than someone who would betray you like that." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who'd been through hell and come out the other side. Linda's cancer was in remission, and she was starting to rebuild her life. I was facing the prospect of single parenthood and starting over at 42, but at least I was starting over with my dignity intact. "There's one more thing," Linda said. "I found something else in Greg's files. Something about your daughter." My blood ran cold. "What about Amelia?" Greg had been researching private schools in Costa Rica, expensive ones, and he'd been asking questions about custody laws and international parental abduction. The implications hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just been planning to run away together. They'd been planning to take Amelia with them. "Are you sure?" Linda pulled out a folder and showed me printouts of web searches and email inquiries. Greg had been researching how to establish residency in Costa Rica, how to enroll American children in Costa Rican schools, and most chillingly, how difficult it would be for an American parent to recover a child who'd been taken out of the country. "They were going to abduct my daughter," I said, the words barely audible. "It looks that way. Marta probably would have convinced Amelia it was just a vacation. Then once they were in Costa Rica, they would have made it impossible for you to get her back." I stared at the documents, feeling a rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was one thing to betray me, to steal money, to destroy our marriage. But planning to abduct my child was unforgivable. "I'm taking this to the police," I said. "I already did. It's part of the evidence in Greg's case now." That evening, I sat Amelia down for the hardest conversation of my life. She was 13, old enough to understand that her parents were getting divorced, but too young to understand the full scope of what her mother had planned. "Dad, why is Mom staying at Grandma's house?" she asked. "Because Mom and I are having some problems, and we've decided it's better if we live apart for a while." "Are you getting divorced?" There was no point in lying to her. She was smart enough to figure it out eventually. "Yes, sweetheart, we are," she cried, of course. Despite the tension in the house, despite the obvious problems between Marta and me, she'd held on to hope that we could work things out. The finality of divorce was devastating for her. "Can I still see Mom?" "Of course. You'll always be able to see your mother, but you're going to live with me." "What about Uncle Greg and Aunt Linda?" That was harder to explain. How do you tell a 13-year-old that her uncle was planning to help abduct her? "Uncle Greg has been having some legal problems. You probably won't see him for a while. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. When she was older, when she could better understand the complexities of adult relationships and criminal behavior, I'd tell her the rest." The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. With all the evidence of Marta's affair and her involvement in Greg's financial crimes, her lawyer advised her to accept my terms without a fight. I got full custody of Amelia, the house, and most of our assets. Marta got her personal belongings and a small settlement that would help her start over. Greg wasn't so lucky. He was arrested on federal embezzlement charges and held without bail. His trial was scheduled for the following year, and his lawyer was already talking about a plea bargain that would send him to prison for at least a decade. 6 months later, I was settling into my new life as a single father. Amelia was adjusting well to the changes, though she still had bad days when she missed her mother. Marta had moved to Florida to live with her aunt and was working as a waitress while she tried to rebuild her career. Linda had started dating again, a nice man she'd met at her cancer support group. She looked happy and healthy, and she'd started a consulting business helping other women navigate divorce proceedings. As for me, I was learning to be content with my quiet life. I'd been promoted to regional manager at work, which came with a significant pay raise and better benefits. Amelia and I had developed new routines and traditions. We were building a good life together, just the two of us. The only loose end was the criminal case against Greg. His trial had been delayed several times, and there were rumors that he was cooperating with federal investigators in a larger investigation of real estate fraud. I didn't much care what happened to him, as long as he stayed far away from my daughter and me. Then, on a cold Tuesday in February, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. "Mr. Morrison? This is Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chen. I'm calling about the Hartwell case." "What about it?" "Greg Hartwell was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent self-destruction. I wanted to let you know before you heard it on the news." I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no sense of closure. Greg Hartwell had been a cancer in my life, and now he was gone. That was all. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. "There's one more thing." Before he died, Hartwell left a confession detailing his crimes and his affair with your ex-wife. He also left a letter apologizing to you and your daughter for what he put you through. I don't want to see it. I understand, but I thought you should know it exists in case you ever change your mind. I never did change my mind. Greg Hartwell had caused enough damage to my family. I wasn't interested in his posthumous apologies or explanations. That evening, I told Amelia about Greg's end. She was sad. Despite everything, he'd been her uncle, and she had good memories of him from before I knew what he really was. "Do you think he was sorry for what he did?" she asked. "I think he was sorry he got caught," I said. "But it doesn't matter now. What matters is that we're safe, and we're together, and we're building a good life." And we were. It had taken 2 years, but we'd rebuilt our family from the ground up. We were stronger now, more honest with each other, more appreciative of what we had. The fruit that had started this whole nightmare was long gone, thrown away and forgotten. But sometimes when I was packing Amelia's lunch for school, I'd remember that pink unicorn lunchbox and the moment when everything changed. I'd learned that the people closest to you could betray you in the most devastating ways. But I'd also learned that you could survive that betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. Most importantly, I'd learned that revenge, when properly executed, could be more satisfying than any apology. Marta had called a few times over the years, wanting to rebuild her relationship with Amelia, wanting to explain herself, wanting forgiveness. I'd listened politely and then hung up. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, some trust too broken to repair. But I wasn't bitter. I was grateful. Grateful that I'd discovered the truth before it was too late. Grateful that I'd had Linda as an ally. Grateful that I'd been strong enough to fight back when it mattered most. And grateful for that piece of rotten fruit that had exposed the rot in my marriage before it could destroy my daughter's life. On a warm Saturday morning in May, exactly 3 years after the lunchbox incident, Amelia and I were working in our garden when she found something interesting. "Dad, look at this," she said, holding up a small seed she'd found in the compost pile. "What is it?" "I think it's from that weird fruit Mom used to pack in my lunches. Remember? The one that made you so worried?" I looked at the seed, remembering everything that had followed that discovery. The investigation, the betrayal, the revenge, the rebuilding. "What should we do with it?" Amelia asked. I took the seed from her hand and threw it in the trash can. "Some things are better left buried," I said. She nodded, understanding more than she probably should at 16. We went back to our gardening, planting flowers that would bloom in the sunshine, leaving the rotten fruit in the past where it belonged. That night, as I tucked Amelia into bed, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Dad, do you ever miss Mom?" I thought about it for a moment, trying to give her an honest answer. "I miss the person I thought she was," I said, "but I don't miss the lies or the betrayal or the uncertainty. I like our life now. It's honest and peaceful and good. Me too, she said. I'm glad we have each other. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. As I turned off her light and closed her door, I reflected on how much our lives had changed. We'd been through hell and come out the other side. We'd faced betrayal and fought back. We'd lost a wife and mother, but we'd gained something more valuable: complete trust in each other. The rotten fruit had revealed the rot in our family, but it had also given us the chance to cut it out and grow something better in its place. And that, I realized, was the best revenge of all.